Okay, I'm gonna start off this Macon Club working group session now. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Matt Friedman. I'm the CEO of the Macon Club, the organization that's sponsoring this event today. I'm going to begin with just an overview of some things that are happening with the Macon Club, and then I'll hand it over to Law, who will do the actual presentation today. So to begin with, I want to just talk a little bit about an update on the human trafficking into scam center scenario that we're seeing unfold across the region. As many of you know, this is the notorious KK Park human trafficking scam center that is on the border of Myanmar and Thailand. This particular facility has been disabled by the Myanmar government, and it's part of a trend that we're seeing in certain countries where these larger scam centers are actually being targeted, and in some cases, raids and rescues are taking place and they're being shut down. Having said that, once the centers are closed, they pop up elsewhere. So it's not as if the issue is going away. We're continuing to see that there is a lot of these scam centers proliferating, but different from before. The large scam centers that we had are being replaced by smaller satellite units where you have a number of different facilities that are linked up digitally to do the same thing. And they're doing that in order to stay below the radar. So the issue continues to be a problem. It continues to be something that the financial institution should be aware of and focusing on. But it's changing and altering. The Macon Club in the last 18 months has developed a series of resources that I'm just going to go through very quickly. One of them is related to typologies related to this issue of human trafficking into scam centers in the romance scams or pig butchering scams themselves. We did a lot of consultation meetings with 31 companies to come up with a list of typologies and red flag indicators that could be used by financial institutions to basically track potential vulnerability within your organization. This has resulted in 4 white papers dealing with the airline industry, crypto industry, generic kind of typologies and red flag indicators and so forth. All of these reports are available on our website for anyone who's interested. And in addition to that, we also developed an e-learning curriculum specifically related to human trafficking into scam centers. It focuses on the various steps associated with the process. Each one is about three minutes long. There's one on recruitment, transport, harboring, and receipt of the victims themselves. An element of forced criminality focusing specifically on the scams and money laundering. And so these can be used by your institutions and organizations in order to basically better understand the factors and the red flags associated with these various things. We also have TV commercials that we've developed in multiple languages, e-learning curriculum that is more for the general banking community and financial transaction and crypto community that focuses on how to avoid being trafficked into a scam center in 7 languages and how to prevent being scammed. These are all free resources that are available to anyone who wants them. Feel free to go onto our website and we'll provide this. Another thing that we have been working on is a job verification tool. So let's say that you're a 25-year-old Hong Kong person and you feel like you want to take a job in Cambodia. You can, in multiple languages, go through a series of questions, yes, no questions, where it asks you, things about the job and how you were recruited and so forth. And by answering these questions, it gives you a coefficient score of low risk, medium risk, or high risk. So this allows for people to kind of test the vulnerability that might exist related to a job that they might be seeking that could turn out to be a human trafficking into scam center job. Just a little bit more about some of the services that we've been working on for the last couple of months, kind of an expanded and improved modern slavery baseline assessment for our association members and non-members that really goes deep into human rights due diligence and other aspects of where a company is in their journey related to modern slavery. We're in the process of finalizing a e-learning curriculum that has 18 videos that focuses on kind of human forced labor, modern slavery, supply chain, sourcing, human rights due diligence, responsible recruitment, et cetera, et cetera. Initially, this will be available in English, but we will put it in multiple languages. With AI technology, the ability to develop AI videos is much better, and the quality is actually much better as well. And so what we're trying to do is to make sure that we can identify topics that companies are interested in order to provide them. And lastly, we're doing a fair amount of supplier training. Some of the banking companies that we work with have suppliers, and they want to make sure that their suppliers understand the indicators of modern slavery. We've done this in Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand. We'll be doing it in Malaysia, Indonesia, and other places as well. If you're interested in learning more about this, let us know. And lastly, we have another webinar that will be happening mid next month on the impact of the Iran fuel crisis as it relates to modern slavery and the vulnerability of that particular issue in countries across Asia. We're already beginning to see manufacturing being affected, shipping, transport, investments, and so forth. Much of Asia relies on fuel that comes from Iran, and if you don't get that fuel, it wreaks havoc on economies and so forth. So with that, I'm going to stop, hand it over to Law, who will go ahead and do the presentation. And at the end, we'll have a survey. So I encourage you to kind of fill out those surveys. That would be great. With that, Law, over to you. Thank you very much. I'll have you go ahead and introduce yourself and go through your presentation.
Well, thanks, Matt. And hi to everybody that's present this afternoon. I'll introduce myself first and then I'll go into the presentation. But first, let me check, Matt, that I can actually be heard because
You can be.
there
And
are a
I can
number
see
of
you as well. Yes.
Thank you for confirming that. Just wanted to be really sure. So, my name is Lawrence Aritao. I actually have quite a long name, Benjamin Lawrence Patrick Aritao. I go by Law with friends and family. Um, it's easier to remember also for those that meet me for the first time. I am by training a lawyer, and I've started my career with International Justice Mission, mostly doing representation of survivors of trafficking in their courtroom cases. Currently, I actually handle a lot of our policy work, looking at ways that we can support structures in government as well as private sector that would, create safer communities and overall better experiences um, for individuals. And I'll go into a little bit of the specific harms that we're trying to address. So, in the beginning, I was very present in, let's say, emergency extractions, rescue operations, and sometimes witnessing arrests. This is actually a photograph of an individual being arrested for distribution as well as creation of child sexual abuse materials. And the only reason that I was actually present here was I was part of a rescue support team that was requested by law enforcement to help ensure that any evidence that was vital to the case could be identified and properly handled. So it just so happened that when I entered the premises and the scene was declared safe, they were actually still transporting the suspect, the arrested suspect, out of the area. And I had with me a camera. I did not take this with my phone. It'd be an amazing phone 5 or 6 years ago that could take this kind of photograph. But I had with me a camera and a good lens, and then it was a lucky shot. But it captured for me a moment in my career where I was very close to the ground, gaining insight from what it actually looks like and feels like to be protecting children by doing some of the work in the field. And so, from field also to courtroom, where I would then take on the actual casework because we had a memorandum of agreement with the Department of Justice to help move cases forward, mostly representing the survivors so that there would be someone speaking on their behalf and looking out for their well-being, but also through a very unique agreement with the Department of Justice, we were able to prosecute the cases alongside an actual government prosecutor, working together to make sure that from the start of the case to the end, the survivor is protected, that their experience of the justice system is actually life-giving and not horrendous, because there are indeed horror stories of how courtrooms can be not always a friendly place for young children. If any of you have had the unfortunate experience of having to testify in court, it can be frightening even for an adult. So how much more for those that are quite young and still unable to truly voice their own concerns. However, as I mentioned earlier, I'm also very heavy into policy now, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is that these valuable insights that you gain working with government partners, public sector and private sector partners, there has to be a way to bring that into the realm of lawmakers and decision makers, policymakers, so that when they craft legislation, it's actually responsive to the real pain points and gaps and problems that are unearthed when you're pushing cases through the system. So it became a great motivation for me that if we are able to do policy work and infuse the lawmaking process with these insights, we can come up with legislation that's actually responsive and effective. And second, and I genuinely believe this, it takes a whole of society approach to actually address online sexual exploitation of children, which we will define so that it's very clear what we're actually talking about. But that's the main idea that there's just not one sector that holds the key to ending the crime. And it cannot simply be on the shoulders of only one piece of the justice system to figure it all out. And this afternoon, I'm quite looking forward to talking to everyone here about what role the finance sector might play in addressing the crime. But first, let's define it in a way that allows us to be on the same page. Just a quick tech check, emoji from anyone if I'm still being heard. Just want to make sure that I didn't suddenly drop off, but I'm seeing a screen with a definition on it. Thank you, Mujono. I'm glad I'm still connected. So, what is OSEC? What is this crime? Now, this is not the technical definition in the law, but it is a definition I like to use because it describes it well enough to capture the elements of the crime, but also situate it in such a way that we understand what's actually happening. It's live streaming of child sexual abuse. And it's commenced on demand, paid for from abroad, perpetrated in Philippine homes or local homes in the demand side country. A few other definitions. Child sexual abuse material is the recorded product of these crimes, the artifacts that remain after the live streamed abuse is done. And another thing I'd like to sort of highlight here is that when it comes to exploitation, there is almost at all times a profit angle. So that when you see this type of crime, the motivation for those that are facilitating it is profit, and they're able to capitalize on demand that is usually coming from abroad. Now, the scale of the crisis, like what are we learning about whether it's widespread or not? Is it contained, or is it something that we really need to, raise the alarm on? So in 2022, we, International Justice Mission, my home organization, partnered with the University of Nottingham Rights Lab. They, for those that haven't heard of them yet, They are a research organization that leads the way in monitoring prevalence for types of trafficking crimes. And as you know, trafficking crimes tend to be a bit more hidden. So the total population of victims is not something that just is advertised or easily found. And therefore, the methods need to be creative, rigorous, and also something that you can validate against real numbers. So the University of Nottingham Rights Lab worked with us to, to design a method to measure prevalence. And then over the course of about 6 to 8 months, a national baseline survey or a national household survey was conducted and layered with all kinds of data from other types of surveys and data sets from the National Statistics Authority and also other agencies of government, allowing the Nottingham Rights Lab to design this multimodal approach to assess prevalence. What did they find out? Okay, could be a little shocking for many of us, so trigger warning, but there were close to 500,000 Filipino children trafficked to produce new child sexual abuse materials in 2022. That does not count the number of like reshares or redistribution, just the number of children that were trafficked to produce new materials. Also, staggering number of almost 250,000 adult Filipinos who traffic children for the purposes of online sexual exploitation in 2022. And this is very unfortunate. Philippines is the number one source country for live streamed, not CSAM in general, but live streamed child sexual abuse materials globally. So that's the scale of the crisis. And now let's talk a little bit about why perpetrators are choosing this. Number one, it's relatively easy compared to maybe other types of crimes that they could do. There are many English-speaking children or children who can understand English. There's high internet penetration in many of the top 20 cities of the Philippines. So it's not something that's difficult to perpetrate. It's also low risk. Um, not out of the 250,000 that were exploiting children, the number of actual perpetrators that were like publicly getting facing accountability was, especially at the start of the program, very, very low. So the risk factor just isn't there for the greater population. And of course, it's profitable. There's a high demand for it, and they can service like many individuals that are looking for these materials online. And I remember one of the rescue support teams I was on, we were working from about 7 in the evening to about 1 a.m., sifting through receipts of different money transfers. Won't name any organizations because there were many different applications used and services used. The point being that it's happening on these surface level platforms, legitimate platforms that are providing essential services. But just so happens that there's also this intertwining with an abuse of those services, a misuse of the financial services. Now, what is the path to protection? So, there is a way forward, and I've just laid out how bleak the picture is. Not to leave us there in the valley, but to kind of set the scene for how we can be a part of protecting kids. Because if there's that many in a single year that are at risk, my hope is that it would motivate us to think of ways that we can be a part of actually building a much safer community, Philippines, for children here, and maybe even learn models that would work in other countries to decrease risk and create that protective environment. So in simple terms, and these are not the technical terms we use in our programming documentation, but the program exists, the program that I'm part of exists to make it difficult to harm children and commit these offenses, and also to make it risky, to frustrate perpetrators in their attempts to exploit children, and also to increase accountability at a systemic level in a way that also impacts the ground, not just allowing accountability to flourish, but also making sure that it is known at the community level that there will be accountability and that it is serious, that it can be life imprisonment if you're caught doing this, that it's not worth the risk to harm kids. So, how how do we make it difficult, and how do we make it risky? And we'll go into that. And what role can we play? So, this is just a sort of a program level introduction to how we are trying to be ourselves in IJM, a part of the solution. It's not possible to go into the 40 plus thousand or more, could be more than that, barangays. As some of you may know, the Philippines has very small local government units called barangays. And these are the tiniest political units in the Philippines. So instead of trying to spread out that way, there are 20 cities and municipalities that contain the highest prevalence of the crime taking place. So the idea then is to focus resources in equipping these high-risk cities to actually respond to the level of the threat and risk in their neighborhoods. What does that look like? It can look like helping them pass their own ordinances to increase the community's ability to detect and report the offense, to respond to it, to make it hard for someone to just be exploiting children and not be detected. And interestingly, for those of you that would like to know the research on this, on how it works on the ground, Professor Ramiro of the University of the Philippines, Manila, many years ago actually had a study on how communities function around this type of offense. And Professor Ramiro learned that there are certain communities, quite a number of them, where it's a bit of an open secret on the ground that you can't be doing this to children and not have some people know about it. But there's something in the local system that disincentivizes reporting or creates roadblocks to reporting. And one of the hopes of our program and the actual strategies is to create a referral pathway, especially in these top 20 cities, that would take away some of that burden and allow like more free-flowing reports to come in. The second number you see there is 2. There are 2 key pieces of legislation we're actually pushing for and focusing on. One of them hopes to expand the capacity and budget of the law enforcers that have dedicated units to protect children. And the other is actually a far-reaching bill that would make it simpler and more understandable for different members of society, including the finance and tech sectors, to know their responsibilities and how to comply with them. So it's an overarching bill that seeks to clarify those things and create greater protection for children victimized by this crime. So that's what the number 2 there means. And the third box is us. So the greater part of the equation is everyone outside of the formal justice system, especially private sectors, finance, technology, can help disrupt the crime in a way that's also compatible with sustainable, profitable businesses so that it's not a destructive element for the commercial sector. And I firmly believe in that many of the protective elements that can be put into organizations and institutions can be fully compatible with commercial models and can even strengthen the bottom lines of industries. That protection and safety does not have to destroy the the sustainability, the viability of our organizations. So the financial connection, I'll dive into this a little bit because I think it's quite fitting for those of us that are here. I have a little bit of notes also for tech sector and hospitality in case anyone is in those sectors as well or has come from them. So let's dive into how this connects to finance. I think you've already uh, perhaps like intuited from what I've said that the payments are at the heart of many of these crimes because there's a profit angle. And again, not to point fingers, but just to say that because there is a profit angle, there's going to be someone reaching for a surface level transactional type of service that would allow them to send money quickly. And you have your offender abroad, orange box over there. You have the digital payment, and of course, the payment being facilitated by a series of providers, as many of us are familiar with. It's not just going to be one institution and then it sends money to another in the country and then one and done. Oftentimes, there are intermediary banks that are able to help in the value chain and in a very like innocent payment, in a normal payment, like 99.9% of payments or somewhere there because of the volume, probably have nothing to do with any crime, and they're flowing through. And in that value chain, you have quite a number of institutions that might be a part of that transaction. And so the digital payment happens. The Philippine perpetrator receives it. They have access to a child victim, and they create the CSAM when they receive the payment. So if you can stop that bad payment, that abuse related payment, well, you can stop the exploitation in that instance. If you can delay it, then you can also create a space where the bad actor might have to back off because they're not able to complete um, the transaction. So again, without digital payments, there's no economy of exploiting children. However, everything I've said, right? Like you can stop it, then it's easy and hard at the same time because reality is you cannot put into jeopardy the millions of transactions that are happening that fuel um, the lives of so many people. And this is something that was observed by survivors as well. They actually, when we were consulting them, talking to them about, how can the finance sector adequately respond to the harms. One of the things that we heard coming up is you also cannot harm innocent users in your system because that's the for the small transactions, right? That's the allowance of a kid or the day-to-day the earnings. It affects so much of life that it is a difficult thing and a hard and also maybe an easy thing to think about at the same time. If I can stop the bad payments and let the good ones through, and then provide information to regulator and to law enforcement, then you're able to provide protection at the fullest. But that is such an idealized situation that that survivors recognize this too. That it's not something you can just implement. You could set a policy, Government might say you have to do this, but then there's the technical gap of figuring out how to really root out these transactions. And I'm happy to share that it's a task that federal agencies in Australia have taken seriously. The Australian Institute of Criminology has actually published a paper that details how they were able to narrow down to a very small set of indicators um, that allowed them to develop a model to identify abuse-related payments with about a 54% um, rate, meaning they could detect 54% of all the abuse-related payments from a given set, which personally I think that's incredible. If you can get rid of 54% of all the abuse-related payments, that's a big amount. But the other thing that might interest you is the false positive rate. It was at 0.3%. And we were asking our friends from the industry, um, what is the practice? What's the tolerable rate of false positives in the credit card industry? Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone here, but it sits at about 3 to 5%, where industry might say if 3 to 5% of transactions tend to be flagged, but they're not fraudulent. It's just that they had to be flagged so that we could catch all of the other bad stuff. That was acceptable. So Dr. Rick Brown at the Australian Institute of Criminology found a method or developed a method rather, to identify 54% of abuse-related transactions with really good false positive rate, 0.3%. So these are promising developments. Other institutions, I'll just share some experiences that other financial institutions have had, not naming any of them, but just to encourage us in the room that, and maybe your banks are actually working on this quite vigorously, which would be great already, if there's already movement. But there were some institutions that are part of public-private partnerships. And on the demand side, they were able to greatly reduce, first, they were able to increase their ability to detect bad actors using their systems. And they were able to share that with other institutions. Like, how did they develop their own internal risk metrics and algorithms so that they could more effectively stop the bad transactions? And they were able to share that by sitting with regulators and collaborating with them, they were able to refine their model and really increase their ability to function well and create these protections. So all that to say, there's experience from the industry telling us that it's possible to create systems that protect and actually still continue operating effectively and not harm, again, innocent users in the process. So I apologize for how small this text is. I just didn't want to consume too many slides or spend too much time here. But all this to say, there are indicators that you can look at. But the main point of this is finding the right indicators and using them. It's actually an iterative process. So what we've learned from other partners in the industry is that some of these indicators may need to be tweaked and changed based on the epoch, right, of the detection. And if you're looking at a specific set of data from one area, then you also have to tweak. So I'm not going to say that you have to look at this and use this. It's just an example of what indicators have risen in the past from an analysis that was done by regulators as well as some contributors from local industry. But again, as time goes by, these need to be back tested and assessed and iterated on. But the encouragement is that with the right amount of learning and fusion of that learning, it really is looking like disruption at the transaction level can be done. And that it turns out the very industry that perpetrators are misusing so that they can do their crime is probably the industry that can create the most good for children. So it is an opportunity, a really good opportunity. So what can we do in our sectors? Let me just reiterate a few things on this end, for finance on this side, and then I'll talk about tech and then hospitality as well. So I wanted to make sure I covered those bases. I felt like maybe there would be some, and I know the Mekong Club actually works with all these industries too. So with finance, it is indeed to detect payment flows and stop the bad ones whenever possible, but also to file those reports and work with regulators, maybe in some cases even encourage them vigorously to get back to you with with valuable insight, because all of these reports are being filed. And I think if industry can also vigorously request that some of that information being sent result in some fruitful analysis, which I think the local regulators are also trying to do. Some of you may know that our local regulator in the Philippines, not the overall prudential regulator, but the Anti-Money Laundering Council, has maybe 20 investigators across the entire country. So even on the resource level, there's a case to be made that government also needs to step up and adequately resource its regulators. And I think I'm happy to share in the past few months that has been acknowledged by lawmakers. So they will be trying to address that too. Technology, we didn't dive too much into it, but as you might imagine, since many of these platforms are also the conduit for CSAM creation and transmission, they also stand in a place where they can protect vulnerable children, either by detecting abuse and blocking it, or even filing the necessary reports. Some of you may be aware that in the United States, they're actually required by law to send reports to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they continue to do so. And which is why we have many figures on how many millions of reports are filed per year. Last box on the right is hospitality. And some of you may be aware of this, that online offending can often proceed and evolve to contact offending. So one piece of the puzzle is to have frontliners who can help detect indicators that there might be at-risk children, and also maximize referral pathways, meaning just report if there's a critical situation. Okay, so that's the per section discussion on the gaps. There was a case, you may have heard of a man named Teddy Mejia. He was heavily involved in producing large, like vast amounts of child sexual abuse materials and selling it. The interesting part was he was operating it out of Dubai, and then he had accomplices and, well, co-conspirators really, so co-accused in the Philippines. And very interestingly, the police were tipped off through a random message to the Women and Children Protection Center. I believe it was their Facebook profile, actually. And through this tip-off, they were able to start, investigating the financial trail. And credit to the industry's members, they were quick to respond to the law enforcement when they were provided with requests for information. So some of you may know that the practice in the Philippines is that law enforcement can request information. Some institutions or some agencies will require a subpoena, and some respond faster, like some payment applications who have a high trust relationship with law enforcement will more quickly respond and give information. So in the case of Teddy Mejia, I believe it was just a couple of days that intervened between the request for information and the response. And this allowed them to actually perform an international manhunt. This was actually in the news, that led to Mejia's arrest in Dubai. And they actually coordinated the ministers in both countries coordinated to make sure that he would face justice. And it's a testament to how the financial records play a big part of the solution, at least improving the case. And so it's a case study that shows how even after the rescue or the arrest, um, the the industry has much to give in creating protection. And of course, the outcome was good. Teddy Mejia was convicted in court. Communities were better protected. He himself is no longer able to exploit children. And the working relationship between law enforcement and counterparts in the finance sector was strengthened because of that. And they actually featured this in a recent discussion with the industry, where the government counterparts were able to explain why they're sometimes very vigorous in asking for information, because the average time between the first exploitation of a child and their rescue is about 2 years. Unfortunately, well, they're trying to make it better, but every day that they have to wait for information is a day where the children could be possibly exploited, which is why they try to move quickly. This is just a recap of everything I've said, because I myself, as an adult, learn by repetition. So maybe some of you are like me. It helps to hear the message over and over until it sinks in. So I'll just say, there's benefit in continuously updating your internal threat and risk models, delaying or halting abuse-related transactions. Very, very effect gold standard, of course. Sharing insights. This is something that I learned from partner banks, that even just by sharing what they're learning in detecting these abuse related payments is powerful. You don't even have to share sometimes the details of the bad actors if your jurisdiction doesn't allow it yet. And I wanted to encourage the support for public-private partnerships, because when there is a legal mechanism to start doing this data fusion, then what we've seen in the past is it's incredibly effective. So we are pushing for that in the Philippines too. For technology, we repeat this message a lot. The use of classifiers, both AI powered and hash based, to look for new or existing CSAM, stop it and get it off the platform. Of course, the safety by design frameworks, hardening against bad actors. And then if anyone hears from hospitality, really just having the right protocols to identify high risk situations, having a well trained frontline crew, and reporting via hotlines. Well, that's it. I want to thank you for being patient and listening. We have Q&A in case there are any burning questions or thoughts. Or if